There we go. The advantage of, well, hopefully my copious knowledge. Anyway, so, Sam I am not. I'm James O'Keefe. I'm captain of the Massachusetts Pirate Party. I will not make you walk the plank, but I do appreciate all of you inviting me to speak before you. I've been testing computer software since 1990, and I've been running crypto parties and teaching people computer privacy and security since about 2012. Maybe I'll just turn this off. All right, so why should you care about your customers' privacy? Well, I mean, there's a bunch of reasons. It's, of course, the right thing to do. Additionally, if you don't, your competitor will. And of course, now that we're here, likely for some of the great apps you're working on, you may not have competitors, but something to keep in mind in the private sector. And then additionally, if your competitor doesn't, that gives you an advantage over them because you care about your customers' privacy. And finally, any leak that results could very well tank your project. All right, I'm going to stop here. All right, so threat modeling. How many of you know what threat modeling is? Okay, handful of folks. Okay, so threat modeling is 3 basic points. So I like to characterize it this way. People at different ages have different threat models. If you're a teenager, your primary threat is your parents. If you're a senior citizen, likely your primary threat is either your kids or, more likely, people trying to swindle you for money. So, but what a threat model does is it helps us to identify where we're vulnerable. And more specifically, there tend to be two kind of diametrically opposed viewpoints of the threat to your privacy. And one is, of course, I have nothing to hide, I'm an open book, I'm going to put my love life literally on YouTube, to the alternative to that, which is I only use my computer air-gapped from the internet. I don't let anyone use it. Everything encrypted out the wazoo. What do you mean it's 2019? I thought it was 1986. All right. So threat modeling helps us to figure out what data you need to protect. From whom do you have to protect it? And what harm would result if your data leaked or went away? And so by thinking of those, it takes a generally insurmountable problem and makes it much more concrete and much easier to think about what countermeasures you need to put in place to the threats that you face. And then finally, from going through this, figuring out your threat model, you can take the steps you're going to need to protect your data and to recover your site faster if there's a breach or if your database goes away. So first, simply secure yourself. Okay, that includes applying security patches to your laptop or phone. Probably should have mentioned that. Other machines, update the software you use with any software patches, get a virus checker, keep it up to date, and back up early, back up often. So if you're doing that in your own personal life, then if the vector to get to your site is through you, it's a lot easier for you to recover. All right, so you want to set up a site. You got to host it somewhere, and you're likely going to need a domain name. You're going to need a domain, right? So those are services that you sign up for. You may or may not pay for them, but you're going to need to make sure that you secure that information, your master, the credentials that you're
over my shoulder there.
We're going to do this. All right, so you want to secure that set of information, because if someone could get into your hosting provider or potentially your domain name server, then they could do a lot of damage. So ideally, you want to choose a password that is a long random string that you're storing in a password manager. And for those of you who don't know, I'm going to put this slide deck up. So if you're taking notes, just keep that in mind. All this stuff that I'm rambling off is going to be available. And make sure you're backing up your password manager securely. Those services, yes?
I don't use a password manager. Mm-hmm. I store all my passwords simply on paper.
Whatever works for you.
Is there a particular advantage to using a password manager?
A password manager makes it easier to back it up. You could stick it on a thumb drive and stick it into a safe deposit box potentially. But whatever, it's encrypted. If your site is doing something illicit, if it's in an encrypted, password protected password manager, then if the police get it, there's only so much they have to expend effort to break in, where if it's on...
Well, I'm not particularly interested in breaking the law.
Exactly. Well, so the point is, what's your threat model?
Not right now.
Yeah. The point is, what's your threat model, right? If your threat model is the police, then maybe having that as something that they can get with a warrant and search your house isn't the right thing to do. It all depends. You have...
I was going to say, it also makes it easier to have longer and more random passwords.
Okay, so all those services are going to require an email address. So get one or multiple ones that aren't your personal email. Just simply because if it's an email that they don't know about, that makes it much harder for them to gain access, say to your hosting provider, if it's some email that could be just one of many in Google. In Gmail, they're never going to go, or Proton Mail or any others. But if it's your own personal email, that becomes a pain point, potentially, a point of vulnerability. If they support multi-factor authentication, two-factor authentication, turn it on. Right? I mean, you don't want it to be that someone calls them up and is like, "Hey, I lost my password. Can you please reset it for me and give it to me?" Oh, sure. Hosting provider I will not name, but we all pretty much know since they advertise in the Super Bowl. Sure, I'd be happy to do that for you. So don't let that be a vector. Use two-factor authentication, multi-factor authentication is just another way to authenticate who you are. And usually things like Google Authenticator or Authy are better choices than text messaging. Because for $1,000 you can spoof any phone number.
Question for you?
Yeah.
I use LastPass, and I always wonder if somebody could compromise my Google identity, couldn't they just get the LastPass and then therefore get to everything else?
If LastPass is simply a file on your hard disk, then no. If LastPass is something stored on a machine somewhere else, then yeah, potentially.
I think it's somewhere else.
I personally don't trust anything that's somewhere else.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
So
do you have any recommendations for
there's a wide variety of stuff out there. KeePass X tends to be pretty good. I think the key thing is keeping it on a hard drive that you have access to, rather than on some server somewhere. Yeah.
I thought you just said, no, the advantage is that your passwords are backed up.
Well, but you can take your database file, stick it on a thumb drive, and stick it in a safety deposit box. Or give it to someone else who you trust.
It's just a file, right?
It's just a file.
It's an encrypted file.
And you could take that encrypted file and then encrypt it again. And then give it to someone else. You could take it and print it out as a QR code. Well, maybe not, but yeah.
So I've seen a lot of sites that when you set a password it says, no more than 30 characters or something like that.
Ooh, yeah.
It always makes me a little uneasy. Because it shouldn't care about, like if it hashes your password, it shouldn't care about the length, right?
Correct.
The content. So how does that always mean that they're stored in either plain text or encoded? Or is there a legitimate reason for some?
I don't think there's personally, I don't think there's a legitimate reason as to why they would ever limit the size of your password. And I don't think any site should do that. I'll talk about that later. All right, and then, I'll just throw this out for the last point. I was helping a friend of mine move from one hosting provider to another one, and we're having difficulty getting the SSH login working, and we call them up, and so we're like, yeah, we're trying to log in, and they authenticate us, and they're like, all right, great. And, the password's not working. Oh, what password are you trying? This password. Well, that's not it. Okay, so if they can possibly verify that, just don't use them. And that's another one who, may or may not be doing Super Bowl ads. All right, so you've got yourself secure, you're backing things up, great. Beware of being phished, and that's not the band, it's phishing attacks. Be careful of all the emails that you get from your hosting or domain name provider. If they ask you to log in by clicking on a link in the email, I think hopefully all of us would know after 2016, don't. Especially if they're like, reset your password, but I didn't ask to reset my password. Check the link by hovering over it, and always log in a separate window using the URL for that site, or if you're the person who stores it also in your password manager, you can do that. Questions? All right.
Yeah,
Yes.
well, if you have to reset your password and you do it and you get an email from them, like 2
But
minutes later.
that's yeah. I mean, the point is, if you get the phishing attack, is you get something that you don't expect, right? Just as an aside, my favorite phishing example is not 2016. So apparently, after Edward Snowden made his way to Russia, when it was revealed as having given all this information on what the NSA was doing, some guy, enterprising guy in computer secure or cyber anti-security at the U.S. Marines. I'm going to test all my people. So he sent this mass email at SEAL Team 6 takes down Snowden. He had the highest success rate, man, of people who clicked on that link. So if those folks can get it, All right, so secure your servers, all right? And emphasize this more. Use SSH to log into the servers. I think in this day and age, we're not using Telnet or SoupDupe or anything like that, but ideally using a public private key such that you create a public private key, you stick the public key up on the server, and then you can just log in. Change the server's root or other login passwords if you can to something long and random. If they're like, 8 characters, numbers, and letters, and special characters is secure enough. 8 is not enough. 100 is better. 50 is probably okay. But again, store that in your password manager, back it up securely, and then finally, if you control your own servers, plan to patch regularly, and just make that a daily routine. Where are we with this? Where is my version of Linux? Okay, well, patch it and go forward. All right, secure your database. If you control your own database servers, again, plan to patch frequently. Don't make it easy for criminals to change the default database and admin credentials. There have been too many cases where MongoDB password, someone creates some database, and I'm just trying it out for now. They use the default, they They load it with all this data, they build some app, and then someone just looks for all the MongoDBs that they can find, and which ones have the default password, and sucks down all the data. Don't be that person. Passwords, salt them liberally. If you're going to use if you're going to use password recovery questions, which isn't necessarily the best of choices, never use plain text. Take it, same thing, encrypt it, salt it, and store it in the database. It shouldn't be plain text. If that thing gets into the wild for some reason, at least that's one more thing they have to decrypt or run a password cracking program through to figure out what they are. And other data, encrypt as much as you can, although I'm going to talk some of that later. All right, so you got your servers, you got your applications, you got your database, you got your application software. All right, again, patch regularly, frequently. If you're using application software, set up RSS so you can be up on what changes are going on. Even if it's some random third-party library you get from GitHub, pay attention to it. Because it could be, there was something where, I think it was in Node, there was the Node namespace, and some person was like, oh, I don't need this thing anymore, let me delete it. And it turned out he took down a lot of sites that were going and using that library. So if you're not up with that, your site could go down, or enterprising person could have come in and replaced it and put in code that'll break into your servers, or start snatching credentials or things like that that's coming over the wild. Yeah.
The screen didn't change, just FYI.
Oh, shoot. I'm sorry. There we go. Yeah, two things across. All right. And if you can, set up some search of the CVE and INST vulnerability databases for the application software you're using. Odds are it probably won't turn anything up, but having it means you can at least be a little more confident that if something comes along your way, you're going to catch it before someone else. All right, and know your dependencies. We're building software and we're including JavaScript libraries or other code libraries. Know what you're using, and if there's any tools where you can look through those dependencies to see other dependencies, use them. Just simply, if you don't, as things get more and more complex, these libraries help us a lot, but they have the potential of being vulnerabilities. And then simply, if you're using some little third-party library to do some formatting thing, do you really need to use it, or can you just write the thing yourself? That may make sense. One fewer dependency, one fewer thing to have to worry about. All right, protect your connections. How many of you use HTTPS? Well, there we go. Use it. If you're secure, if they're secure between your customer's browser and your site, that's that someone along the way isn't going to be sniffing things. SSL certificates, you can pay for them. They can be $100. You use Let's Encrypt, it's free. And ideally, you can have, if you're connecting your different servers together, if you have multiple servers and they need to communicate, you can use self-signed certs. There are exceptions you can put in to your libraries to say, I trust this certificate, and have them communicate over HTTPS. You don't want to get it that your application server gets it and then talks to the database, and that database connection is not secure, right? So security all along the way. All right, you have keys. You need to keep, yes, sorry.
I just have a question regarding Let's Encrypt on your previous slide.
Previous
Why would
slide?
someone go for anything else than Let's Encrypt if it's free and works? Do you see any limitation in this?
I haven't seen any limitation with Let's Encrypt, but it's really up to you. If you're willing to spend the $100 to do it every year, and you feel that that's more secure, then do it. I mean, Let's Encrypt, it's used by thousands upon thousands of different sites. including, Akamai is one of the ones, and I won't say Akamai is my employer. It all depends on what you feel confident. If it's some small app, then you could start with Let's Encrypt, and if, the app becomes bigger, you're like, I really need to use one of these certificate authorities. The problem with the certificate authorities is they can be man in the middle. That has happened in the past, so you just have to be cognizant of that.
Is that not equally equal with Let's Encrypt?
Sure, absolutely.
This is super interesting. I'm not sure if I'm in the right place then. Is this the hack night?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay,
Well,
cool.
But you can, this is different than usual. We're having a workshop today as well as individual projects. Are you new? Because you
Yes,
might
this is
want
my
to do
first time.
orientation
There's a new orientation that way.
at the very end of that hallway.
I might come back. Thank
It
you.
was very nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, so you've got keys, you want to keep them secure, login credentials, database keys, private keys, secure, backed up, your computer, encrypted password manager, not in, as Andrew said to make his point, it should not be in your source repository, especially a public one like GitHub. That's just a file you don't check in, right? That's the file with the credentials is just the one that it's like put into the, forgetting what
Get ignored.
dot ignore, yeah.
Dot
Put in-
get ignored.
Dot get ignore, I'm sorry. You want to put that in your file, like that's never going to get checked. Gets backed up some other way, but it never goes into a public repository. All right. Well, I was talking about backing up and stuff, but back up your servers, database code regularly, store backups in a separate location, encrypt your backups if you feel you need to, and test your disaster recovery plan. And the key thing is if you have a reliable offsite, especially even with offsite backups, it can help you foil ransomware attacks. So if someone gets into your system and they go through and they're like, oh, I'm going to take all this data, encrypt it, and then drop the key and say, send me 50 Bitcoin. You don't care because you just go through your disaster recovery procedure and you're like this, okay, to the Bitcoin hacker. So, and also, if your data center goes down, it can matter a lot if you have a backup. I'll give you an example. I won't name the company. All I can say is they were a previous employer, though I was not with them at the time, but I thought this was interesting. So in September 11th, when the towers went down, it turns out that was the data center of a financial company. And so they lost all of their source code repository. And they went to all the people, the satellite offices, and said, hey, what do you have on your hard disk? Because we need to rebuild the source repository. So don't be that company. Don't be that organization. Back up offsite. All right, so customer logins. I talked a little bit about this before. The first line of defense is thinking about how the customer comes into your site and how they log in. If you're going to save the customer's password in plain text, you've already done strike one. Okay. Ideally in this day and age, you want to give them multiple third-party sign-in options: OAuth, Google, Facebook, Twitter, whatever. Never store the password in plain text. Always encrypt and salt your passwords. There's other techniques. For a password, the trivial it is to crack. I mean, the way password cracking software does is they don't go and, I'm going to take this password and I'm going to run through a lot of algorithms to figure out what it is. No. They just go and say, how many of these are password 123? How many of these are 1234? And they just match on that. So encourage your customers, your users, not to be that person. And that includes, encouraging them to, so don't necessarily require them to use upper and lowercase case characters with numbers and special characters, because, we never remember those, and people are just going to do 8 characters, and it's all going to be password with a capital P, a number 1, and various numbers and things and some ampersand at the end. So just encourage them to do a long password and give them positive feedback for that, and never require them to update their password, because they're just going to do old password, number 1 attached to it. Yeah, I think he was first. Yes.
I know that there's many databases of the first million common passwords. Are there any services that allow you to take your user's would-be password and check it against those? And is that okay practice?
In looking at it, I think it's one of those things where you probably want to have something that you run locally in JavaScript that basically says, does this look like the top current, does it contain the word password in it? Does it contain a numerical sequence of numbers in an up or down iterating order?
One turns to a canonical, attempt to do that.
Do you want to send that over the internet? Do you want to send someone's password over the internet?
Can you do
To
it
someone else you don't
can't
trust?
There's no way of getting that, is there? Are there databases that are small enough you can acquire to actually look up the first million?
You could look at haveibeenpwned.org.
Okay.
That's all-
Okay,
well,
okay,
that's what I've
yeah.
heard it,
I've
Okay.
used that one.
But
before,
you
yeah.
can. I'll talk about that at the end. But you can look at them, and they might have databases of passwords. But I think it's, if someone, if it's the top 100 easy to crack passwords, that'll probably get a lot of people like, please don't do that. You're not going to be secure. You do this longer thing.
I use passwords that are completely random, uppercase, lowercase, special characters, 12 to 16 characters. Is that enough characters, or do I need more than that?
So that's roughly 60 to the 12th or 16th power. So that's fairly good, but I think you would be better just using, lowercase characters and numbers to the 30th power. I think that's going to end up being a bigger number. So usually the longer the password, it's like, all the 8-character passwords, those have been figured out. My guess is probably the 12 and 16 character passwords have all been figured out. They're in a password cracking software. The 40-character passwords, probably not. And ideally, you want to be in that tail of passwords that are it's just not economical for them to worry about cracking it. Yeah.
Talking about this tail of password and the cost it will take to crack it, do you have some visual charts data backing this? Because I think it's really helpful to have this kind of, okay, we always say that I'm always being told to choose this kind of password with such length, etc. And I think it lacks of communication about, okay, you got this password with this number of characters, which is how many times and cost in terms of resources it costs to crack it. But if you go for 10 characters more, okay, now it's 10, it's order of magnitude bigger and costier to crack.
Well, so if you use uppercase and lowercase letters and numbers, that's 52 different permutations, right? And so if you add one more character, that's like multiplying the complexity of your password by 52. If you do 2 characters, that's 52 squared, 3, 52 cubed, so on and so forth. So the more that you add, it goes up exponentially, just by simply adding more characters. Even if you're doing just all lowercase characters and numbers, that's still 36 possibilities. The key thing is length. There are different ways of doing it. I mean, you could do, I wouldn't do like a key Shakespearean sonnet, like take a phrase from that. That's too easy, it's known. But if you just, like, you're in a room and you pick 5 or 6 random words, that could work, and that's human understandable. So if you're not going and using a password manager and just say, here, give me 30 characters, random uppercase, lowercase letters, and numbers for the nice 52 to the 30th power, those probably aren't in there. Remember? So these leaks come out, right? And so there are these databases, and they're sitting out there on the web, and criminal individuals, organizations will get these, and they'll add them to their database, and they'll look through, and to be honest, they're looking for all the people who are using password or password 123, or they want to get all those, because that's just economical. If they're like, this thing doesn't match our top 1,000 or 10,000, maybe it doesn't make sense to go through and check it. So you want to be in that long tail, both as an individual and as a business. That's where you want to be. So it's just not economical enough for them to be able to go and get that information. But you can never be, I don't know, maybe we'll have, in 10 years we'll have computers that can just solve this stuff like that.
Quantum computers.
But the point is to encourage your customers in that way. So these are, I think NIST says it's bad practice now to ask them to update their password every 3 months, even though employers of mine have done it, and it's just annoying. It's like if I choose a darn good password, that's fine, check it and say, hey, you shouldn't use, this is too easy to crack, that's fine. But I shouldn't have to redo it each time. Yeah.
As far as salts go, is it better to have one salt for your entire database, or have a different salt for each account and store that?
That's an interesting question. I don't know that. I actually went looking before I wrote this, and I couldn't. The more you can make the data difficult to figure out, the better off you are. But at the same time, that could potentially then that's potential. Like if you need to store that information, now you're storing it for every user. Then that's data that could leak. Then what's the point? Where if it's like, okay, it's in a separate file someplace. And it's like they get to the database, but they don't get to the application server.
It also depends on your threat profile.
Right.
Like if someone's going after you personally, that's different than if they're just kind of taking the lowest hanging fruit.
All right, so authorization, your customer can log on. Woohoo! Now you're going to make sure they can only see their data and not the and the data that they're allowed to see, right? So, you can use your automated test suite to log in as one user and then try to access someone else's data and verify that your software does the right thing and prevents them from accessing that. But we make mistakes, and there's some other things that you can do. So AT&T back in 2012. I don't know, had a website, and each of the customer IDs was an integer. So some enterprising person who's probably a Nazi scumbag, but anyways, no, I'm not, he is a Nazi scumbag, went and used this vulnerability against them and was able to walk the entire database simply by iterating through. So don't do that. Don't use just single numeric identifiers. There are different ways of generating random character sequences. Use them and then use those as the ID. You're I've got it in the database. If you need to access it, it's great, and then someone can't walk it. And again, longer the better.
Does that have an impact on query performances? Or is it I imagine it's cheaper for the database to index integers rather than string, but I don't know for sure.
It's probably the shorter. Probably the shorter it is, the easier it is to index, but still you're indexing it. So depends how big, if you've got millions of people, then that's a problem. If you've got thousands of people, then it's probably less of an issue. I mean, this also depends on how much hardware you're throwing at it. So I can't answer that, but the point is, ideally, you don't want to.
So it might be better in some cases to use a random number as opposed to like a GUID or something?
The problem with the random number, well, yeah, potentially, but the problem is if it's like, let's say it's a six-digit number, you can have a bot walk through those six digits fairly easily. Where if it's a GUID, I forget how many characters a GUID is, but it's a lot of things to go through.
Yeah, which the other point as well is pointing out, you also hit a hard limit with the number of records you can store. Big limited numbers versus
I mean, they both have a limited number, you just have many more.
exactly, because for us, like what we do at work, we can't use integers because it's too small, or we can't use longs because it's too small. So even if we want to.
Good to know, thank you. All right, so you've secured your server, you've secured your database, you've secured your application software, you're good to go. But do you really need to collect the data you think you need? Really? Yes. I mean, the less data that you have, the less vulnerable you are. So just think before you collect it. I know there are companies out there who I shall not name that just want to collect the world, and governments too. But if you don't need it, don't store it. As Cory Doctor has pointed out, that's a liability that's hanging over your head. As soon as that data is out there, you have a potential liability.
I have a question in that regard. What's your take on logs? Like
On what?
logs, just basically having data leak into your logs.
Logs.
Oh, logs.
Yeah.
I would say you shouldn't have data leak.
Well, do you?
It depends on what the data is.
Yeah.
You don't want to leak passwords. I think passwords in the logs would probably be a bad thing.
But do you keep the same kind of strict rules on that side as well as you do within your mainline app?
Well, it's in your threat model. If you have the perfect logging system and no one's ever going to access it, then yeah, drop whatever you want. If you think that is a potential problem where someone could get into your logging server because, it's the logging server, why do we need to keep it up to date all that often? Then maybe not put it in there.
Don't you think that this motto, do you really need to create the data, maybe in contradiction with the current trend in machine learning, deep learning style, where the more the better is often the motto? And don't you feel some kind of friction inside your company around those two, like cybersec concern and data science concern? Or how do you balance this trade-off?
Data is toxic waste. Why do we want to accumulate toxic waste? I mean, sure, you could have this and maybe you'll find the cure for cancer. Probably, and if that's what you're trying to do, then it makes sense to gather that data. But the point is I'll just gather everything my customer does on my site down to the minutest detail. A, you have to store it. B, if it leaks, maybe it could get used against them or get used against you. If you don't need it for your operation, then don't gather it. When you decide, hey, actually, I do need their date of birth, then go and start gathering it. But if you don't need it, don't gather it. Yeah?
So two things. First, one thing with that is you can also you can come up with the algorithms or the results of that data and dump the old data. So you don't need to with machine learning and stuff like that, you can kind of get the value from the data, but get rid of the storage data when you don't need it.
So like, if you know what you want to calculate, say you want to calculate how many people clicked on this button, instead of storing this user clicked on this button and did this and that and that, just add a count to how many people clicked on the button. Right?
Or clicked on the button that day, that hour, that whatever.
And then also a question which I'm not sure if we'll get to, but as far as collecting, not collecting data you don't need, would you also recommend rejecting input that's like sensitive data? So such as like not accepting social security. So if you've got an application where you don't need that data, but people can potentially enter in that information, how would you handle it in that perspective?
I would say not have a social security field.
Right,
And then they
so-
can't enter.
Right. So not have a field, but also if you have an application where they can potentially create their own fields for storing information, like rejecting that type of field.
That's
or
an
just
interesting
not
thing. So where
necessarily.
they can actually create their own data
Yeah.
sets within it. Yeah, the problem is it's like, how many different permutations can we do of social security number? The social security number, social security number sign, social security, I mean, I don't know what you use.
Right.
SSN, my SSN, your SSN, his SSN, her SSN. I mean, like how, like are you gonna reject everything that is that set of numbers?
You
Are
can
you
check
gonna,
for the length of the number instead.
but what if they put dashes?
No, I know. But you could reduce it to just integers, and I mean, you know.
Yeah.
But like, as a usability thing, I might suggest if you do reject it, bringing up a warning about why you're rejecting it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it depends if you can easily identify what piece of information they're giving you.
So if there is low-hanging fruit, then giving a warning saying, hey, it looks like you're collecting
Yeah.
X data.
I
We
mean,
don't recommend storing.
Sure. I mean, you can always go like they could just do a text field and
Yeah.
call it something, and there's data entering social security numbers, and you could like go through your database and anything that looks like a social security number and say, that's like a social security number, and that's mine. Wait, you know? Yeah. Then you go back after the fact and contact them. What are you doing here? Why are you doing that? What's against our policy? So. All right, so the data that you do collect, you want to secure it. Know the minimum set of data you need to collect. Analyze your data set for what's the worst, again, it's the threat model. What's the worst that could happen if this data leaked? Anything that's private to your customer's name, address, social security number, do you really need that? Has to be secured and encrypted and salted. It has to be encrypted. I mean, there are cases, as I think you were pointing out, where you can just store a representation of that data, but not the actual data. Like you could go and just use the same password algorithm to take that text and store it in the database, and then it's harder. Although there's only so many social security numbers, so
And then when
not
they have all the social security numbers already.
probably. But the other thing to think about is personally identifiable information. It's not simply, date of birth and address and social security number, but it's other sets of information that could then be used potentially to identify that individual. So just think about that. I don't have any actual solutions, but I remember years ago Netflix was like, here's all this data of our customers' choices. Go and have fun with it and see what you can figure out. And someone went through and identified like 70% of the people in there just by their user preferences, just by which movies they liked. I'm like, okay, think about that. And if nothing bad's going to happen to the piece of data that it gets out, then you don't need to worry about it. And I'll be clear, like you could go and say, oh, their favorite color. That's not going to be a problem until you see someone's password, reclaim your password. What's your favorite color? Like, it's like all those sites that, you'll see on Facebook of like here, fill out this survey. I'm like, no, I'm not going to give you that information. So you shouldn't have it. All right, designing secure code. I'm kind of go over this quickly. SQL injection attacks. Protect yourself. This should be a solvable problem at this point. And if you don't know this XKCD cartoon, you should read it. Don't leave yourself open to cross-site scripting attacks. There are other OWASP top 10s, but those two are the key point. And be sure to keep up with your software updates. At the end, I'll have links.
What does OWASP stand for?
So OWASP is a group that I'm spacing on the name, unfortunately, but they oversee network vulnerabilities. They have their top 10 list every year of these are the vulnerabilities, these are the web application vulnerabilities that they've identified as the ones that are popping up most now.
Oh, cool.
It changes. All right, so there we go. Your data leaked. How do you make sure you're the first to know your data leaked? Or hopefully. So you can put fake data in your database. If the data leaks, and then go and stick it at haveibeenpwned.com, register those fake emails, and then as soon as it gets to haveibeenpwned.com, you'll get a notification. Hey, oh yeah, well make sure that the real emails go somewhere. Just say that. So they're not really fake emails, but the fake data. And you'll get a notification from them saying, oh, you were in this random vulnerability we found. It's just one way of knowing. I mean, if your hard drive if your servers or database gets deleted and someone asks for 5 Bitcoin, actually probably 50 Bitcoin at this point, then you'll know you were hacked. But this is another way if someone gets the data and doesn't leave any trace of themselves. It's just another way to know your data's in the wild.
I'm wondering if the market is fake data, so you don't include it in your, and then when they know it was fake data.
I mean, it's just user data, right? I mean, the key thing is they may not go through and see, if this is a recipe application, they probably want to get the user credentials. They probably aren't paying attention that you uploaded 5. They're probably paying attention that you didn't upload any recipes or didn't like any of the recipes. But if you want to fake that, you only have to fake it once, and then once you're done, right? And they don't need to know. It's like you can have that in a separate file, fake data file, and you know which ones they are, but you don't have to. No one's going to use it. No one's going to log in as that user, right?
Yeah, no, I was just thinking if you have
An
fake
analysis
user, you
tool or
need
something?
to- Yeah. And I feel like there are some cases when you need to filter out the fake stuff, but I guess you could then pull it from a separate file.
Or yeah, I mean, you could when you go through the analysis, you could say exclude these set of IDs.
Yeah.
All right, so you did get hacked. Come clean early. Honesty is the best policy. Tell them what you did to minimize the breach. So if the only identifying information that you have is their email and their first name, say, yeah, we got hacked, and because we care about our users, the only thing we store is their email address and first name, because we use OAuth for any logins, or we use Google or Facebook or wherever, and we don't keep passwords. Then at least they can know you tried. Then you go, how are you going to solve it now? How are you going to make sure it doesn't happen again? And if you have some service where you're charging people money, it's like, how are you going to try and compensate them for the hassle they've had to go through? I mean, you're a small company, so probably you're not going to go and pay for identity theft software for them. But you could say, well, we'll give you 3 free months. Sorry. I mean, it's up to you as to what you want to do. One thing, don't be a meme avoid the Streisand effect. Does anyone not know what the Streisand effect is? Okay, so the Streisand effect, coined by Mike Mastick, is basically when you try and stamp down on something and keep it quiet, and that results in the thing you're trying to keep quiet blowing up so that everyone knows about it. Specifically, Barbara Streisand was, I believe, trying to I think there was a wedding on her property and some helicopters were there with paparazzi taking pictures, and she was like so upset, and she was suing them or trying to get them not to post the pictures, and that of course meant that everyone wanted to see the pictures. Like, don't be that person. Don't be.
I thought it was Google Maps that like had a picture of her mansion or something, and she didn't want people looking at it. I don't know.
There are any number of instances. Maybe that's the one. But the point is, Barbara Streisand tried to silence some information, which meant that everyone wanted to see the information. Yeah.
So as far as OAuth, I mean the difficulty, as I see it, is that if the OAuth provider goes down or out, if Twitter goes away, then anyone who's registered with their Twitter OAuth can't log in. So I've seen some sites allow OAuth and then ask you to set a password, which seems kind of defeat the purpose, but I can kind of understand where that logic comes in. Is there a way to, I mean, not that I think Twitter is about to go down, but is there a way to kind of guard against that possibility using OAuth?
Only by having multiple OAuth providers. And that they may not want to, I mean, even Facebook went down for what, 12, 16 hours? So, yeah, I mean, it's again, if you're keeping the password safe and salting it, then yes, it's a potential bit of data that's going to get out, but it's like, you also have to weigh what the user wants, right? If the user's like, I don't want to log in with OAuth, I don't want to tie this application to my Twitter account or my Facebook account or my Google account, I just want to log in with my own username and password, that's what they want. And it's like, we gave you the opportunity, you didn't want to take it. We give you this other thing because we want to help you as our user.
So do you think the best approach would be to offer OAuth and username password?
Yeah, they can choose one or the other or both or however. All right. And then here are the resources on OAuth, OWASP. Oh yeah, finally, how to reach me. I'm at jokeefe@jamesokeefe.org. There's my public key if you want to send me encrypted email. I have cards. You can send me messages via Signal at the phone number listed there. I'm going to post these slides tonight on the website. That's all I got. Other questions? Yeah.
Europe just passed
GDPR.
Yes, and
Yeah.
I've heard numerous people say, look, it's now the new default. Doesn't matter if you're American, your customer's American. That's the new standard. And it's, like California smog effect. Everyone makes cars that could be sold in California. You should be adhering to this too. That way you can have European customers also, by the way.
But you can go and check their country. Oh, they're from an EU country? Sorry, our site's not available to you. I like that. It was funny. There was some newspaper that was like, oh, in order to comply with the GDPR, we had to drop all of this JavaScript stuff, which made our site so much faster in Europe. But also other sites have gone and they've said, yeah, we just can't see. We just will not show you our site. Like, I think it was like LA Times. I think I was doing like, yeah, I was using my VPN.
On what you just talked about.
Absolutely.
Do you support that whole package, and do you think that it's good practice to be an early adopter of that, or?
I think it would be good to, I mean, the GDPR has problems, but being in compliance with it where it seems sensible as an American site.
It's
It's
the
probably
thing
a
about
good thing.
local data that makes no sense and really is problematic with
Well, I mean, if you're,
local storage.
right, I mean, if the people who are using your site are in the US, then and the data's in the US,
And you're compliant.
and you're
they kind
compliant
of
with
were
the
there.
US, but, I mean, I think you have to analyze that and look. I mean, if it's a small site, if it's like a nonprofit site, you could potentially, and it's something to look at, but I'm sorry, I didn't add that into this. I'm more concerned that don't leak the data and protect your customers' data and don't gather data you don't need. And so some of that will also come into the GDPR, right? If you're not gathering data, then if you're gathering little data.
I think they have stuff about having an overt policy about data gathering and stating what it is and there's some like norm you have to say what you're doing. There's certain points you have to say specifically what you're doing about data gathering, and you're supposed to have it in some format and make it available to your users. Some
Yeah, hopefully
documentation of this
it's
kind
not
of stuff.
52 pages long, and, I mean, ideally, if you're gonna
I've
have a
seen a
privacy
one-page.
policy.
I had someone go through it was a WordPress. It was like how to make your WordPress site compliant with this and this. Here's a one-page template. Here's 7 points. This is what the 7 points should be. If you don't want to write it yourself, use your own, but comply with the points.
Right.
And they cover much of what you were speaking of here, but they say you have to overtly state what you're doing and upfront and overt about it in a legalistic way and put a disclaimer about what you're doing.
I think transparency is always a good thing. I'm a pirate, so I believe in that. But it's going to be up to the particular site creator what they want to do.
Yeah, I mean, I recently created a website for a conference that's passed, and we had to be GDPR compliant. I don't know if we satisfied it or not, but we just asked we just said, we're gonna send you some emails if you don't want to opt out, and gave it and said we use cookies, and that was kind of all I thought I had to do. Was I missing? Like, is there more that you have to do for GDPR?
Potentially. But, Europe hasn't sued you yet, so you probably could.
You're being sued by Europe.
Actually, the individual countries in
The
Europe, so
entire
Germany
continent.
might sue you.
Your site's not available at this point.
Yeah, well, other questions? Other comments? Anything else I should have put in? Yeah.
How does SQL injection work if the database is not pure SQL, like say Mongo, which I know has other security problems depending on...
But then that would be Mongo Injection, right? No, I'm not sure specifically. I mean, Mongo is a flat file table database, right?
It's like JSON. It's like JSON, yeah, essentially.
So, I mean, the key point is you want to sanitize your inputs such that someone can't insert some code to extract more information than they might otherwise be able to do. So as long as you're sanitizing your inputs and making sure to go back to, yeah. You're not doing something like this, then you're probably good.
Right,
It'll
so with
depend on
SQL
you.
injection, you would check if there were quotes or parentheses or something, you would do something to...
There's I think a new standard, which is the SQL injection checking is within the driver, and that you only pass the parameters and not a full-fledged SQL statement. And that's at least true in the SQL-based databases. And so the new standard is don't do checking on your own. No, make the driver do the checking because they're the most up-to-date people. So you move to patch your driver. Make sure your driver is the most up-to-date version, and don't try doing it yourself because we'll take care of like monitoring what's going on and making it clean. So never pass the statement, just pass the data, and then you pass the statement somewhere else, and they'll put it together for you. Thank you, and do the cleansing.
Yeah, I think most,
Maybe.
I think most drivers have places where placeholders that parameterize it, and so you don't have to do concatenate a string.
Build your own string and clean all the pieces in
Right, you
between.
do.
And
You do select from table where question mark, and then you pass in.
Well, I know it's a non-issue in certain frameworks. I'm pretty sure React scrubs everything input-wise unless it's otherwise said. and I think Angular does something similar.
Have tests.
Yeah.
Have automated tests that are run every time you check something in. And then you can be, if it's the driver, okay, you'll catch it there. If it's the, the application code, you'll catch it there. Just have tests you can run. Unit tests, integration tests. Yeah.
So this has been fantastic. It's given me a lot of things to chew on. So I think I will go back to work over the next couple days with Brad, and after we finish up our big project deadline, we'll probably think about some new ways of doing our development process. But after we sort of do that, one of the things I think about is, I'll be working on something, and then I'm sitting down and I have a manager, and he's sitting there, and he's like, Matt, so is this all secure? And so what do I tell him?
Hand him the slide deck. I would think the answer of is this secure is, that is not an easy answer.
Yeah.
It's like what, again, a corporation should think about what are the threats. Your boss should, or boss's boss, or whomever in the organization, should, user privacy is job one, but should make sure that as an organization you're thinking about what are the threats that you have to worry about, and communicating that to everyone who's writing code, maintaining databases, servers. This is the one part that you're working on. Here is the entirety of the threats we're concerned about. Here's your part to play in that, so everyone knows, how they're going to make sure that the data is secure and the servers are secure and things like that.
One thing you didn't talk about is there's a move to the password, the configuration files that will have a connection string, a user ID, and a password, in a file so that you can connect to a database, for instance. And there's a big move to
An API, using APIs, or
no. Many a framework from Node to WordPress will have a config file that will have
don't check it in.
data store. We don't check it into your repository, but is that good enough? There's a move in some microservices frameworks where you never have configuration information like that in your file. You get
A database
or your console, and the data stored in a vault, and that you can go to like incredible levels of very intense security, but how far do you go? And you're stuck with some, if you're small scale, you might be using a small scale framework which uses an older paradigm which has config files. You're stuck with the framework you choose.
You're at the end of the day, there's only so many days, only so many hours in a day, right? So.
But I'm just putting that up from the standpoint of what's secure. It's like, well, given what we have to work with, it's okay secure.
You could do some centralized key authority where all the servers are validated, and you're not a valid server, so I want to hand you the keys, or things like that. Employers I've worked at have done things like that. But if you're just a small project or a small startup, then you have to do what you have to do, right? If you're keeping your server up to date, hopefully you're reducing the likelihood of having your server be vulnerable. I didn't mention, I probably should have, you can compartmentalize things. You can have one user has this set of access and another has that set of access, and you can't go from one user to another. I should have put that in. And you can kind of separate them.
You gloss over so much, but to talk about just keep your server updated. Well, if you were to promiscuously update everything, it wouldn't be very long before most infrastructures would crash because of dependency problems. You upgrade everything, and you're going to find you've got a new library that isn't compatible with the newest library of something else. You've got to have A to B testing if you want to do that. You have to have staging and production. So a lot of these things dovetail with having a reasonable scaled infrastructure and a reasonably scaled IT, deployment scenario. So it goes hand in hand.
That would be version 2.0. It's like that.
I think this was like a basic thing. If you want to go deeper, I think,
yeah, if you're in an
I don't know
enterprise
how deep you
setting,
can
that's
go
a different
in
story.
a couple of hours, but
Although you could just use a very old, obscure framework that just makes it so
Never change
unlikely that anybody's gonna bother.
Hey, 5 1/4-inch floppy disk, NORAD, man, and our missiles, our nuclear missiles, 5 1/4-inch floppy, or is it 8-inch floppy disk?
It's a great security code.
Yeah, because no one has any way to play it now.
Chinese don't know how to get those discs made.
I think I have some in my basement. Other questions? Well, thank you very much. I'm glad you found this useful.